Hello all, and welcome back to a new episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we are kicking off our new season of TV and Us, where we will be reviewing Severance Season 2, and today we are on Episode 1, titled Hello, Miss Cobel. If you haven't watched the episode yet, this is your spoiler alert. I mean, especially for Severance episodes, you need to go in blind on these. So please check out the episode before continuing to listen to the rest of our conversation. Okay, Sarah, we're starting a new season.
We are finally. You know, people have been waiting for this season of TV for years, and the day is finally here.
Yeah. Are we going to get some answers, or will we have just more questions as a result of this season? We shall see.
I love that you're even asking that question, because I'm just too cynical of a person, and I'm like, no, we're going to get no answers. We're just going to get more questions.
I have such a...
Which is, it's entertaining, so...
You know? It's so interesting and so infuriating, all at the same time.
Yep. And that's how they get you. And we are so happy to be back. So, I mean, this show is doing its job.
It really is. For those that don't know, we actually reviewed Severance Season 1 just a couple of months ago. So we did our homework. It is fresh in our minds, and we're ready to dive into this world again. All right. Well, Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an episode summary for the premiere of Season 2, Episode 1?
Sure. Mark returns to work under different circumstances. Secrets from the Audi world come to light.
Ooh, that's very good. Yes.
Right? It's real good. Real vague.
Summary. Yeah. Leaves lots of intrigue, does a pretty good job of hitting the big points without revealing too much. I like that. I love the under different circumstances bit.
Right. Yeah, that's doing some work right there.
Doing a lot of work. Okay, well, in TV and Us tradition, we start off the episode with our episode titles of choice for the episode that we are going to be talking about. So, Sarah, what is your episode title for this first episode?
Mine is Been a Minute.
Nice. I love it. I love when, I don't remember which character gives that line, but I just got like such goosebumps because it feels like they're talking to the character, obviously in the world, but it feels like they're talking to us too, you know? Very well done. Some great writing there.
Yeah, it's well played. I appreciate that the show knows that people have been just dying to know what happens next and is kind of poking fun at that a little bit. It's a nice inside joke.
My episode title is 3 New Friends.
Ah, yes.
Yep.
Yes, we do meet some new people today.
Indeed. Okay, well, let's dive right in and talk about our thoughts about this episode. I think, obviously, whenever we start a new season, the first episode is so interesting because it lays so many foundations, clues, and seeds that the rest of the season will cover. So tell me your thoughts about this episode. Did it work for you? Did you enjoy it? Are you intrigued? Are you hooked?
Yeah, I think for me, the highlight of this episode is definitely that opening of Mark just running through the office. It's absolutely phenomenal. We started at a 10 out of 10. Like I was so pumped. And I feel like the rest of the episode does a really good job of doing all of the things that the first episode of a season needs to do. So we have, I mean, it's been years since the first season came out. So we're reacquainting ourselves with these characters, with Lumen, and they're facing a new reality too. And so I appreciate how this episode really effectively sets the stage for what's to come. I found it really interesting that we spend all of our time in the Lumen offices, and we don't really see their outside selves at all. And I think that that's a really interesting, deliberate choice. So I'm curious to see how and when the show will reintegrate those other sides of these characters, and we'll get to maybe know more about what their outside selves are doing now too. But all in all, I feel like this episode is really effective, and it does exactly what it needs to do to level set us, get us all on the same page for this journey that we are about to go on for the next 9 episodes.
Yes. This episode also really worked for me. As I mentioned earlier, I had such a complex relationship with season 1 of finding the premise so interesting, kind of getting invested in the world building, but found myself trying to figure out like where is this show going, especially with the characters. And some of the things that I really love that this episode does is that it plants so many seeds for these really interesting character moments and kind of like peeling back the layers of these characters that we've seen them operate in season 1. But I think this episode feels like it's pushing those boundaries a little bit more and going a little bit deeper on each of them. So some of our characters make some surprising choices, some interesting choices, or there's decisions that characters make that are teed up to be kind of like weighty in what that says about kind of a crossroads moment for some of them. So some of the big ones that stand out to me, I think there's some really interesting Helly moments that I think we're going to talk about where she chooses to withhold some information. There's some really great moments with Dylan where we're seeing kind of this like very like soft and open and vulnerable side in the way that he expresses his care for Irving, which I think is really interesting and pushes that character forward more. And then obviously Irv is faced with this decision of whether he plans to leave and never come back or chooses to stay. And I like that this episode has a little mini arc for him of him ultimately choosing to stay. But for a while, we don't know what he's going to do. And that says a lot about his commitment to figure this thing out. What is Lumen up to? The age-old question. And then even with Milchek too, like him staring so intently at the Hello, Miss Cobel opening sequence and him kind of stepping into this new role in these big shoes and wanting to make a name for himself and to do well in this role. Like there's clear like ambition and aspirations that he has that I think are going to make for some really interesting character moments for him too. So I thought like those pieces for the characters and pushing them forward and increasing the boundaries of what we know about them is one of my favorite things that this episode does in particular. So there's some great like world building moments, but I think that the way that this episode sets up the character arcs is really fun and like has me much more engaged than if we just focused on some interesting new world building bits that might like tickle your mind and prompt some thought trains, but may not be as engaging as some of these characters and what they're thinking about and what their journey is going to be this season.
And I think that's an important building block in this show. You know, I feel like the first season, at least for me, the best part was the world building. And I was so curious about this world and this procedure and this company and what are they doing. And so it was this really interesting intellectual exercise for me, but I wasn't maybe as invested in the characters as I know a lot of other people were. And I think that this season is setting up, like you said, those character arcs, and we're going to see these characters go someplace, you know, and we do see that in the first season, but I'm hoping that we get more in this, and then this can maybe be a little bit more character driven now that we've spent an entire season in this world.
Yes. Please make it more character driven because I will just be more frustrated if we just get more details that make no sense about what's happening with Lumen. You know, like having that anchor point, I think helps us navigate the chaos of the world that we're exploring, and it gives us something to root for. And I think like we talked about in our season 1 discussions, the last few episodes where our crew of characters are really advocating for and rebelling, that like builds so much momentum for the back half of the season. And I love that the show is continuing to build on that character forward storytelling. I think I would feel less invested in the show if it was just more interesting world building stuff. So I think that they're making the right choice, and the season 2 beginning feels like the right time for it as well. So I was also even thinking about how long of a larger arc that the writers of the show have thought about, because it was smart for them to hook us in season 1 with some really interesting world building, a really interesting premise, get us invested, and now we can really supercharge and go deep on who these people are. And perhaps that was all part of their strategic plan of continuing to keep audiences engaged and invite us in deeper.
Yeah, and we are ready. Like, if that was their plan all along, they have definitely succeeded, because we are primed to know more about these characters. And I think the show is also teeing up this really interesting concept between the outer selves and the inner selves. And now that they've seen what it's like outside, and they've seen a glimpse of their life outside, kind of reconciling those two parts of themselves, I think is going to be really interesting. And we're already starting to see that a little bit with Mark and Helly. And so I'm so curious where the show is going to take that, and what the show is going to use this story to kind of say about our culture and about how we view ourselves, and what it looks like to be, I don't know, a human operating in this world. I think there's a lot of really interesting places that the show can go with this premise.
Mm-hmm. That brings me to one of the interesting bits that, we just don't know how Lumen's going to respond to the big events at the climax of season 1 that the show literally ends with, and then ends on a cliffhanger with us. But I thought that the concept of an Audi visitation room was really fascinating, and all of the potential complications of that it feels surprising for Lumen to plan for that, and to have like a whole architected floor plan around it. And it led me to think about, like, is Milchek, like, is this just a nice idea that is meant to keep the severed folks satiated, happy for now, and thinking that there's going to be a plan forward around this thing that they're advocating for, but they actually don't ever plan to create that, because it seems like such an opposite stance from how Lumen has approached the concept of and policies around the severed workers from season 1, and it's not in their interest, really. So it helps them have this whole great PR campaign around the reforms, and that they're listening, which we have to talk about that whole sequence. I thought that was so interesting. But my cynical side feels like that's just a nice, like, feeling of hope that the company is giving them without actual plans to carry that out. Because I think about the implications of your innies meeting your outies and meeting your Audi's wife. Like, that just goes against what seems like Lumen has stood for. And so I'm curious your thoughts about that whole concept that Milchek paints a vision for Dylan around the Audi visitation room.
Well, and I love that scene because, and I didn't go back down to like write the exact phrasing, but when Dylan asks, like, is that a place where I could see like my family and etc., Milchek's answer is something to the effect of, like, if you read it, that's what it says, or something like that. So he doesn't actually answer Dylan's question. And I thought that was such an interesting way that Milchek gives Dylan an answer that Dylan thinks is a yes, when in actuality, Milchek did not answer his question. And so there's something nefarious going on here. And I really loved that scene because we see how Milchek has pulled Dylan aside, particularly after Dylan was just having this really tender moment with Irv and convincing Irv to stay part of the team. So we're seeing Dylan's influence within the group. And then Milchek pulls him aside, presumably gives Dylan the thing that he wants most, and tells him, do not tell the rest of the group because they will react badly to it. And so he's using Dylan in such a strategic way to try and be a wedge in this group by dangling this thing that Dylan wants right in front of him. And so I thought that was so smart. And I'm so curious to see kind of what other tricks Milchick has up his sleeve, because that's a level of, I don't know, just sophistication and manipulation that I really am curious to see where that goes, because there's more to Milchick than meets the eye, and I want to know what happens. I know he's the bad guy, but there's something about Milchick that I really enjoy, so I want to see so much more of him.
Right? I'm like, what does this say about me? Why is he becoming my favorite character? Because he's the bad guy with like the most sly smile, and so strategic and so cunning that you gotta just respect the game, Like, he plays the game well, and he's getting what he wants. What's really fascinating about that whole sequence with the Audi visitation room plans that he tells Dylan to, like you mentioned, he says to not tell anyone. And I feel like that is such an interesting reflection of, like, in corporate America, in large organizations, I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, that sharing bits of information or knowledge about, like, organizational politics or the happenings within the company with select people is like this toxic way of building trust with those that feel like they're in your inner circle. And what's so fascinating is that when Milchick shares that if Dylan were to tell his other coworkers, they would turn against him. It's almost this like threatening blackmail-esque way of saying, I'm giving you this information. You are in the quote unquote inner circle, whatever that concept is for Milchick. But it comes at such a cost too, And I thought that's such an interesting reflection of the complicated team, organizational, people dynamics that happen when you put people together in organizations and teams, and all of the stuff that comes out of us as we try and build relationships and allies and build trust with people in sometimes these unhealthy ways. So I thought that was fascinating to see the way that Milchick wields that as a tool, this like insider knowledge of you are in the inner circle, but it's going to cost you something too.
And so I'm really curious to see how Dylan responds to this. Like, obviously Dylan goes back to work. He doesn't share this information with the rest of his team, but Dylan was one of the first ones to kind of call BS on all of this. He started reading the book and then was like, oh yeah, screw all of this. Like, I want out of here. And so, and him seeing his family and all of that. So there's more to Dylan that's going on. So I'm curious to see how he's going to respond, especially because he spent most of the episode being like, Milchick owes me a belt, and he was really upset about that. And he had this like physical altercation with Milchick in the finale of season 1. So I wouldn't imagine that Dylan would trust Milchick all that much. So maybe he's just playing his cards close to the vest for right now. I don't know. We'll see, because I think there's more to Dylan also than meets the eye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which again is a great example of the seeds, the character decisions that are planted in this episode that will be meaningful whenever we see how a character is going to deal with that. So that's a great example of like he's sitting on this piece of information now, and whether he decides to trust Milchick or decides to use that and choose his team will be a fascinating character defining moment for him, and kind of where his loyalties and where his desires are, because the desire to see your Audi wife is very strong too, but when that competes with your loyalty to your team, then it gets really interesting. Very, very interesting. So another character that is sitting on some information and makes some decisions about what to share and not to share is Helly. So I thought it was so fascinating and interesting that Helly tells a different story about what she experiences on the outside in that climactic sequence of season 1. So obviously in the season 1 ending, she wakes up, her innie wakes up in her Audi's body, and she's at the Lumen party, and she's the presumably one of the ones that exposes this whole concept of the severed being treated poorly and whatnot. But she chooses not to share that with any friends and coworkers. Tell me your thoughts about that choice for Helly.
Yeah, I think I read that as Helly, inside Helly is so mad at her outer self that it's almost like she's ashamed of it. Like that's kind of how I read that decision. That she almost is disgusted that her outer self is rich and involved with Lumen in this way and is part of that class of people. And so that's why she chooses to keep it to herself, because almost like she is so ashamed and disgusted by that fact that she doesn't want her teammates to know that and then feel that same shame and disgust toward her. So that's kind of how I read it. More of like self-protection than any kind of like outright deception. But I don't know, that might be a charitable reading of Helly.
No, I read it similarly, and her being afraid of what this means within her standing with her team and their ability to trust her, because theoretically they feel like her outie self is part of the system that they're fighting against. And that complicates how they choose to work towards this common goal together of being able to rebel against the system. So I read it as her being afraid of how they would react as well. We'll see. I don't know. Like, Helly's always been really smart. And so I don't know if there's a larger plan or purpose that she has. And she's also been one to like go it on her own too. So we'll see if it's out of like loyalty and desire to be with the team, or if she's thinking about like a larger, grander plan that she's scheming to take the system down.
Yeah, and I found it interesting that Irv is the one that's kind of questioning her story and being like, wait, you saw a gardener at night? And like he's
so smart.
He's very smart, but he's also like sweet and kind, and so isn't outright just being like, the hell, Helly, you're lying. Like, he's just like, wait a second, these things are not adding up, but does it in such a like chill way that, I mean, it could easily be dismissed by the others. So I'm also curious to see how the Irv and Helly relationship might evolve over time. Will he become more suspicious of her, or will he, kind of force her to answer some of these questions and maybe reveal a little bit more than she's willing?
Yep. Agreed. And based on her facial expression when he asks about the night gardener, I think that she knows that he knows that she knows, like, I think there's kind of a knowing between the two of them of like, no, okay, you might not be telling the whole truth here, but like, we're gonna let it slide and we're gonna talk about it later. But I think that she has revealed a lot more of her cards from the way that her face looks as he asks the question. I think Irv is intuitive enough to notice that. It'll be fascinating to see how they can potentially use this information for their advantage of their plans. Like, you've got someone on the inside. Let's use that strategically, because you have someone that can theoretically on the outside is part of the system or has infiltrated the system in some way. I don't know. I think that there might be something about that piece of information that will potentially come to light at just the right time, or the worst time, we'll see, for what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why I read Helly's reaction more as disgust instead of fear, just because it would be a really strategic asset to have, if we're trying to take down Lumen, to have your outside self be in such a prominent position of power. That might be a real asset. So I don't know. We'll see. But like you said, it's going to come out. We just don't know when, but it's either going to be at the best time or the worst time. And either way, it's going to be very entertaining.
Yes. All these seeds of potential like bonding between our characters, or things that'll crumble the bonds that are being formed here. So I think that's really fun. So Dylan's sitting on some info, Helly's sitting on some info, Irv's got some suspicions. Lots of things that could help build them stronger together as a team, or really start to create mistrust amongst them, which they're gonna need to be bonded in order to take this thing down. And how will Milchek fan the flames of all of this, because Lord knows he's going to somehow.
Yeah, he sure is. So I'm excited to see how he tries to manipulate this team, because there's already some wedges between people starting to form, and we see, we got the Helly and Irv situation. Dylan potentially has a reason to isolate, and then that animated video calling out Helly and Mark for their moment at the end of season 1, just not chill, and then learning about Mark's wife, and so that's inserting a wedge between Mark and Helly too, and there's all kinds of feelings wrapped up in that. So there's a lot of reasons for this team to be fractured, and so it's interesting that this episode works so hard to bring them together with all of the fractures, and I think that's going to make for some really interesting character moments going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I really liked about this episode is the structure of it. So it feels like it has 2 halves. We get a first half where we're introduced to some new characters, which we should talk about. And then we almost have to wait until the second half to see all of our characters back together again. And I thought that was really smart to build the desire and anticipation of hey, there's these characters that we fell in love with in season 1. Where are they? And building the suspense of that I thought was really great. But tell me your thoughts about some of the new friends, our 3 new friends that we meet in the first half, and how, what is happening with what happened with Mark? Has he been working here for 4 or 5 months? And then only after that 4 or 5 month period did his other, Helly, Dylan, Irv, get returned back into their innie selves and come back to work. Tell me your thoughts about that whole context building.
Yeah, I thought that was really smart too, because we also don't know where they're at. And so you see Milchek, feeding him the lines of oh, they didn't choose to come back here or whatever. And so we don't know where they are. We don't know if that's the truth. We don't know if they're here, but they're also split up among different teams. We don't know what's going on with these characters. And I love that we're consistently seeing Mark trying to figure out where they are. And he just wants to be with his team. He doesn't want to get to know these newbies. Nah, dude. He needs the OG Severance crew. And so I loved that rhythm, and kind of seeing how far Mark is going to go. I feel like in season 1 we watch his trajectory of company man, and then he starts to question and maybe have some doubts, but he's really low-key about it for a long time, and he is trying to just stick with the company and be a good supervisor. And it's only in the end that things start to go haywire, and he actually joins his team to try and fight Lumen. And so I love that we get to see that resistance fighter Mark in this episode just right off the bat. I thought that was so great. And because of his actions, his entire team comes back. So I'm still curious about what happened to them. Where were they? What actually went down? Because we can't trust Milchek, as charming as he is. We can't trust what he's saying. So where was this team? We also don't know how long it's been. Will we find out the answers to these questions? I don't know. But yeah, it definitely leaves a lot of questions for us to be asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what's also interesting is that it creates doubt in us as the viewers around why and what motivations Lumen has to allow these four to be back together again. You know what I mean? If these four were the ones that were the whistleblowers and were clearly plotting to rebel against you, if you're Lumen, you want to keep them apart, right? So there's something that Lumen has in store for these four coming back together, to watch them or observe their conversations and watch their every move, that is somehow going to be beneficial to some larger plan that Lumen has. Because when they are all four back in the office again, I thought it was really great that Mark was like, hey, maybe we should like speak more quietly, because Lumen's probably listening to our entire conversation right now and everything that we're discussing. And so the reach of Lumen's influence and ability to observe these four, and then kind of like the looming question of why would Lumen allow them to all be reunited again, is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. There's clearly a purpose for it that they have in mind, and we will wait to see what that is.
Yeah, because you would think that you would want to keep these resistance fighters separate, divide their power, but they're going to try and bring them back together, and Milchegg is trying to covertly influence them to be divided, even though they're physically together. So that's going to be a really interesting push and pull throughout this season.
Yep. Okay, should we talk about Miss Wong?
Yes, she is a supervisor, not a friend. So she gets her own special category.
I know that they continue to revisit the whole bit about why she looks like a child, but it was really funny every time. My favorite is Mark W. and the old man that just is like, I have a question. Why are you a child? It's great.
Yes. And then she says, because of when I was born. I loved that. The delivery was absolutely perfect.
Yeah. She is clearly teed up to be significant. I'm curious your thoughts about her introduction into, she has entered the chat. Tell me your thoughts about her.
She has entered the chat. I'm so curious. Like, we've brought a child to work? Like, what? What is Severance going to tackle this season? Are we getting into child labor? Is that where we're going?
I was like, yo.
I mean,
high key savage, and I love
let's
it.
talk about it.
Go there. Yes. Severance.
Yeah. I'm here for it. It's very fascinating. So I think she's an interesting addition. I'm just curious what they're going to do with her, because she is so prominent in this episode. And it's like, okay, what? I don't know, because we know Lumen is up to some shady stuff. So like, I wouldn't put it past them to have some child labor.
Yeah. But
it's also kind of clear that they're not doing anything also. Like, like they're looking for their scary numbers, or, she's at her desk playing her little game. And so what are they actually doing? Like, what is actually going on here? Because not a lot of work is being done. So will we ever learn what Lumen is? Probably not. But the inclusion of Miss Wong definitely made me ask, like, what is Lumen? What are we doing here? This doesn't make sense.
That's the question, man.
Honestly, though.
Yeah, she's fascinating. I think she'll be pivotal to this season, obviously. There's a moment when Mark meets her and he squints at her and looks at her a little more closely. And then I think it kind of like cuts quickly to images of him and Miss Casey, his wife. And so I was like, oh my gosh, are they going to do like a Miss Wong is Mark and Miss Casey's child business?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, that feels like that's where the show's suggesting, but also that feels too obvious for Severance. So I'm sure it's not going to be that, or a play on that. I don't know, but that seemed like such an intentional suggestion for the show to make so quickly and so early. Any other show would just let that be and then start to like build and plant those seeds much later. But the show's clearly like doing some kind of suggestion, but maybe subversion here. But there's something that Mark has a feeling about, and I'm so curious. Like, what's her origin story? Who is she? Why is she here? Who is she related to? Who are her parents? I think there's some million questions that come from that little sequence of Mark squinting and looking at her a little bit more closely.
Yeah, I had the same thought and it made me angry. So I just chose to discard that because I didn't want to be angry in the first episode of this season. That's just my coping mechanism, is to just disregard things that I don't like. But I did wonder if, because Severance, the severed procedure is so shady and we don't fully know what was going on with Miss Casey. So I do wonder if there's I don't know, if there's another track or something within the severed floor and different, maybe those upper level employees go through a different process, or maybe, I don't know, are do they raise these children to then become supervisors? I don't know. There's just so many places that this show could go with these characters, and the introduction of a child into this show is a bold choice. So I don't know. They have so many directions they could go.
Yeah.
And we're gonna find out what happens.
We are. And that interesting ending 30 seconds of the episode too, where Mark's doing his macro data, whatever it's called, cleaning the scary numbers, and then it has this super quick cuts over to Miss Casey in some kind of observed lab environment or something like that. But there's all these numbers on screen. I literally rewinded back and paused to see if I could find any clues about anything about what's on screen there. But she is somewhere and seems to be observed, and there's all these datas and metrics around her that I don't know if it's related to what they do with the scary numbers or something, but there seems to be a suggestion there too around where Miss Casey is and what happened to her, and what is macro data refinement? What does that mean? Is it related to whatever Miss Casey's undergoing at the moment? We don't know. We don't know anything.
Yeah, we still don't know anything.
You gotta be humble to watch Severance, because you realize
honestly,
that you
though,
are just a lost little puppy navigating a very large, confusing world.
Yeah, much like Mark in that opening scene. We're just running around these hallways that all look the same, and we're just confused the whole time. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, any other last big things that we wanted to mention before we give out some TV and Us awards?
I would like to give out a shout out to the scene in the break room.
Yes.
I loved so much in that scene. The video is absolutely incredible. Labeling what they did, the macrodat uprising, and kind of mythologizing what they did. But my favorite part of that whole scene was the encouraging motivational posters that are on the wall. It was so good. My favorite one said, "I'm a frolicaholic." And that just tickled me so much. So just shout out to the production team for creating those posters. I definitely took the time to read all of them, and they were all fantastic.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That whole bit was so funny. And it's so it's so savage, that video too. But it's designed to be so fun, and that's so corporate. You know what I mean? Let's make something really dry and low-key savage, but package it up with smiles and rainbows and animated figurines, because we have to make it fun somehow and engaging somehow. Oh, it's great. Nailed it.
And then I love that Dylan hesitatingly claps at the end, oh, I want to clap for this, but should I be clapping for this? Yep. It was so endearing.
I have to mention a small detail that brought me much joy. Over the course of season 1, I had this whole theory around birth and goats and all that whole bit, right? The birth theme and the goats that were being nursed for whatever reason we don't know. And can we just take a moment for the fact that the goats scene is in the recap of the beginning of this episode, where Mark and Helly walk into the room, and this man in a suit that's nursing a goat says, "No, they're not ready yet." And so I don't know. The shots that they choose to include in recap sequences always are such clues for me to be like, oh, we're including that. Like, where is this episode going to go? Where's this season going to go? And I just feel so satisfied that perhaps my hope is still alive and now fed by that one small shot that they include in the recap, that perhaps we'll get some answers and the goats will mean something. Maybe they'll mean something, Sarah.
Maybe they weren't just a random thing.
But it's in the
we'll see.
All the shots in all of season 1, all like 8 or 9 hours of footage. That one made the cut. Yeah. Why? I want answers.
Yeah. Well, Jen, I have some very good news for you. We are going to watch the entire season 2 of Severance, and we're going to talk about it on this podcast. So, if there are more goats, we're going to have plenty of time and space to talk about them.
Oh, yes, we are.
We will. And if we don't find out, we can come up with some crazy fan theory to make it make sense. So either way, we got the goat content covered.
Thank goodness. We'll finally find the goat yoga room. That'll be great. Milchek's like lunch break activity. He has a stressful job. He needs to wine somehow.
I would love that. I want that.
A bright, like matching yoga set.
Yes.
Great.
I'm here for that. I hope that is the answer, is that they're breeding goats so that Milchek can do goat yoga. It's perfect.
I love it. He seems like a sweatband kind of guy too, matching colors with
absolutely.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yes. Yeah, one of those like sets right out of the 80s.
Yes, exactly.
Fluorescent color.
Exactly.
Yeah. I see it. This is perfect.
I love it. All right. Well, let's give out some TVNS awards. So for those that are new to TVNS, this is a bit that we like to include at the end of our episodes where we give out some fake awards to moments, characters, lines of dialogue that are significant and fit the category of the award that is aligned and themed to the season of television that we're watching. So for Severance, we have 3 awards. The first award is Employee of the Week. This is given to a character on the show for whatever reason that we decide that they deserve to be the Employee of the Week. The second category is Move the Needle Moment. Classic corporate speak around move the needle. So this is where something significant has happened in some way, and we can interpret that however we see fit. And then the third category is achievement in corporatese. Anyone that's worked in corporate knows the corporate speak is real. It's a whole dialect that we all somehow absorb and know. So we're giving now an award to a line of dialogue that fits the bill in this category. All right, Sarah, what is your choice for who you're giving Employee of the Week award to this week?
I want to give it to our guy Milchek for getting the team back to work seemingly happy.
Yeah, he does. They are ready to go.
They did try to overthrow Lumen. They are the rebellion, and he somehow got them all back into working in MDR. So I think that's quite the achievement.
Milchek did a great job. That whole little montage sequence when they're sitting up in their chair and they're turning on their computers and they're getting to work. I'm like, why am I feeling a little kick of motivation for them too? I'm like, oh, I'm so happy. But then I'm like, wait, no. Our goal is to break out of this. This is not good.
Yeah.
I'm not happy. We must not drink the Kool-Aid. No.
Yes, we are back to escape with Miss Casey, presumably.
Yes, please. My choice for Employee of the Week is also for Milchek, and it's for him bringing Mark S. some welcome balloons.
Yes, I love those balloons.
Oh, a classic Milchek moment where he's just ushering a little bit of whimsy, a little bit of fun, a little bit of play into this really toxic, chaotic world. Welcome back to your prison. Here's a bunch of balloons for you. Oh,
with your face on them, too.
That's terrifying.
It is. Oh, it's so good.
Great. Okay, second category is Move the Needle Moment. What is your choice?
When Mark S. tries to get Mark W. fired.
Oh, yeah. That was great. And Mark W. is not having any of it. I love that.
Nope.
His face, looking so displeased, cracked me. It was great.
Oh, it was so good.
I hope we see more of that crew. They are spicy and they are ready to go. So, okay.
Mm-hmm.
My choice for Move the Needle moment is Helly's choice to withhold some information about what she saw on the outside and what that does for this team, this crew. It's gonna come out. You know what I mean? Anytime a character says something that's not the truth, but we as the viewers know it's the truth, it's gonna come out somehow. And the question is just how and when and what all the reactions will be. So that's a fun build-up of suspense of how that's gonna happen for the show this season.
Yeah, setting up all of that potential relational tension. Yep. It's great.
Okay, the third award category is Achievement in Corporatees. What is your choice for this category this week?
I gotta give it to our girl, Miss Wong, when she says, I have to remind you that I am a supervisor, not a friend.
So good. I love all the bits of her. She is so funny. She is so
yes.
Funny. And yes, it's the classic like parenting bit that I know parents think about of like, I'm trying to be your parent, but also your friend, but I'm not your friend. And then I know bosses do that too. So that's fun. She is setting boundaries.
Yeah, those boundaries.
Yeah, go Miss Wong.
Yeah, I'm here for it. Like, you go, Miss Wong. You set those boundaries. They're very clear right from the jump. I love that. I love some clear communication.
Yeah. And then she has Mark correct that he has not met 4 new friends, but 3 new friends. It's such a great power play. It's great.
Oh, I love it.
My choice for Achievement in Corporatees is the Be Ever Merry poster in the break room during the presentation.
Oh, yes.
Oh, it's great. All of them. All of them
so
really,
perfect.
But that one especially cracked me up. It's so silly.
Another line that I absolutely loved is from Mark W. when he asks Mark S., would you be open to using a different first name to avoid confusion?
Oh, it's great. It's great. Yeah.
As a person named Sarah, who grew up in a time when it felt like everyone was named Sarah, I definitely understand the struggle.
It's funny,
it's
though,
so
because
good.
Mark, that like there's no other variations of Mark. You know what I mean? Like if it's a Matthew, it's like, okay, you go by Matt, I'll go by Matthew. But with Mark, like what is Mark? How are we gonna come up with a variation? So great.
Just a whole different name.
Just S.
We're gonna draw one out of a hat for you.
All right, looking ahead, what are you excited to see next?
Yeah, so one of the weird questions that I have is, what is up with those purple offices that we saw in the beginning? I want to know, because I don't know that if we have seen the purple offices before, I have forgotten about them. But it's such a bright color in stark contrast with a lot of what else we've seen in this show. So I want to know what's up with the purple offices. And then, why is Milchick so obsessed with his welcome screen? And like, what does that welcome screen mean? Or what does his upsetness about the welcome screen mean? So I have more questions about Milchick. And then we already touched on it, but why is a child working at Lumen? Like, what? I really like Miss Wong. She's great. But also, she is a child. So what are we doing here?
The top of my list is, what's up with Miss Wong? There's so many questions. So many questions and so many directions that the show could go with her. I just really hope, I'm saying it now, I hope they don't do this is Mark and Miss Casey's daughter. Please don't do that. Maybe he can think that for a while,
be upset.
But I hope he finds out he's wrong and there's some other reason why she's there, because we don't need more of that. But she's fascinating and seems like a larger thesis, moot point, commentary on large corporations that Severance as a show is making. So I think that's going to be really interesting to follow what they do with Miss Wong. Cobel, I don't think is out of the picture. She's looming somewhere, and I'm so intrigued to see what she's been up to and how she's going to invade into this storyline somehow, because her presence is clearly felt in this episode. Obviously, Milchick has a whole fixation on her, but she's so pivotal in season 1 that I'm sure she's going to come and collide with this plot somehow. So I'm excited to see when Cobel decides to show up and be an agent of chaos.
Oh, yes, because we don't see her in this episode. So she is just lurking in the background somewhere. And it's interesting how Milchek puts the blame on her for everything, which is also like, man, what a corporate thing to do, too. Just blame your predecessor for everything. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens with her, because she has a really weird relationship with Lumen, too, and to Kier and all of that. So how is that weird, almost religious devotion going to come into play? And she knows so much about Lumen and is now presumably scorned by this company.
Right.
What's going to happen?
Gonna join the crew and help? Like, are we like common enemy?
I'm ready.
That we become like on the same team now? It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I really just want her to be an agent of chaos, because that would be so fun. And Patricia Arquette would just have so much fun with that too, I feel. So I hope this is setting up just chaos agent for Miss Cobel. It would be so fun.
Please. Yes, please. And then just in general, we want some really great Milchek moments, okay? The man is so entertaining to watch, and you never know what you're going to get with him. So the whole dancing sequence of him in season 1 just goes like rent-free in my brain every time I see him on screen. Like, I just can't unsee that. So he cracks me up. Love to see more of him. And then the goats. I want to know about the goats. I'm holding out hope for the goats. So the same way that Milchek has a fixation with his welcome screen, got a fixation with the goats. So I want answers.
And I hope that you get the answers that you seek. And regardless, we're going to be here. So we can talk about the goats if they come up, or we can just keep asking questions about the goats if the show chooses to ignore them, which would be rude, but we'll still be here to talk about them.
There will be lots of questions, lots to talk about with every Severance episode, as always. Well, this is our review and discussion of episode 1 of season 2 of Severance. You can find it available on Apple TV+. Thank you for listening to this episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we start our journey through Severance Season 2. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and a review, letting us know your thoughts about episode 1. You connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at TBNSPod, or email us at tbnspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss episode 2. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again very soon.